Welcome back, it's me, Lou. Alright, so today is the weekly vlog. I thought we'd do a little bit something different today. This is going to be kind of more so a history lesson. So I was kind of digging through my basement and I found that I have a collection, a pretty sizable collection of this. This is Tomart's Action Figure Digest. So one thing I'd like to incorporate into my channel, especially with the vlogs, is that maybe every now and then, we'll go over one of these older magazines. You know, if you're like me and if you grew up during this time period, this is kind of like stepping back into the time machine and you get to kind of relive this period of action figure collecting. If you're much younger and you're unfamiliar with this is kind of like giving you an insight to like what collecting was like so many years ago. So this is something I'm probably going to try to incorporate into my weekly vlogs every now and then. Just showcasing one of these older magazines, and it'll give us a chance to revisit, the late 90s, the early 2000s, and whatnot. So what we have here is Tomart. This is issue number 32 for August and September of 1996. Back then, this magazine retailed for $5.95, and this issue features the Star Wars Renaissance. There's also the Spawn 1997 sneak preview, Thundercats update, and customized Star Wars toys. Also new releases. The cover is very eye-catching. This is the Kenner Power of the Force 12-inch action figures. Fans were really excited about this line. But there were kind of like a couple of shortcomings. Like, for example, this Vader here, his head was way too small. But these figures, they were great. They were kind of a throwback to the larger figures that Kenner produced in the late 70s, early 80s, with those 12-inch figures. One of my buddies, Gabe, he has a sizable collection of these things, and they look fantastic when they're on display. Now, let's get started. On the inside, we have an advertisement here for the retailer, the mail order retailer, Puzzle Zoo. If you've been in the game long enough, you'll remember Puzzle Zoo was kind of one of the more popular action figure mail order companies. They even had some exclusive action figures. So this one here, in their ad, they're kind of highlighting upcoming Spawn releases. And the prices are amazing, $11. So this was for the, which Spawn wave was this? I'm not sure which wave, but this gives you an idea of some of the figures we got back then. Really cool, fun stuff. Yeah, so this is a real step back into like the time machine. There's some cool lines too, like Total Chaos was a cool Spawn line. I remember these Toy Island. They were like dabbling in Terminator and RoboCop. And some of these action figures you can find at your local KB toy stores. If you had a shopping mall that had a KB, often you'd find the Toy Island stuff there. This is very cool. This is the old WWF Jakks action figures. These were the bone crunching ones, and I believe this might have been the first wave. Those are awesome. Here's the editorial page. Some more mail order retailers like Outer Limits. This is, which shop is this? Another retailer. I was about to say online retailer, but you have to keep in mind this was like the mid 90s and not everyone was online yet. Here's the news page. Talking about 12-inch Star Wars figures. Some talk about the Spawn repaints. The New York licensing show. And then they talk about how this magazine is going to go monthly starting the next issue. If you're into 12-inch figures, here's some customizable figures. You can buy the base body and get the different heads. So if you're into like the 12-inch G.I. Joes, this was kind of cool. Tally Ho Studio. So if you're into like, so I think this was kind of predates like the popularity of like cosplaying, but if you're into like Star Wars, like replica costumes and props, you know, a Tally-Ho studio, they kind of dabbled in that. They sold masks, maquettes, helmets. And there's kind of an example of the prices you're looking at. Mock Time Toys. This was another popular mail order retailer from back in the day. And then here's some of the prices on some of their figures. For example, let's get some to focus if we could. Like Batman the Animated Series. You know, like certain figures like Poison Ivy and Phantasm, they're going for like 30 bucks, 35. Now these are like collector prices, you know. These are the prices you pay when you're dealing with like pirates. And then this will give you an idea of what else was out. You know, Toy Biz, Generation X. Yeah, this magazine's mostly just ads, it seems like, for like mail order companies. Here's some, are these starting lineups? What are these? So there was a company, I guess, called Best Card Company, and I think these might have been, these were 10-inch figures. So I guess maybe these were made to compete with starting lineup. I'm not sure if starting lineups was even around back during this time period, if it was still a thing. So here's the Star Wars Renaissance. So this is kind of like maybe a year into like Power of the Force. Many of you will remember Shadows of the Empire. It was kind of like a multimedia campaign put out by Lucasfilm. There was a Nintendo 64 game, a comic book series, a novelization. This kind of followed the further adventures of the core cast of Star Wars characters, and this took place. Shadows of the Empire took place between Empire Strikes Back and Jedi. So that's awesome. Here's some of the figures. You get Chewbacca as Snuva, Prince Shizor, Luke, Imperial Disguise. You got Dash Rendar, very popular fan character. Some of the 2-packs. And here are some of the figures, or most of the figures, actually. I think Shadows of the Empire, I think there was some excitement surrounding it, but I think it was also kind of one of those oddball things where a lot of fans weren't too keen on it. For me, I enjoyed it. You know, we're getting new characters, new figures, and for me, that's not a problem. Also, the Nintendo 64 was coming out, so I was very excited about the new console and the Shadows of the Empire video game. And then at the bottom here is some of the 12-inch figures in their boxes. Really nice. These figures, they don't go for a lot on the secondary market. So if this is something you're nostalgic for or interested in, you know, some of these figures are pretty cheap. And then here's kind of Thundercats. So every now and then the magazine would kind of do like a flashback and highlight, you know, an older action figure line and provide prices, you know, like how much they'd go for on the secondary market. So these are the older Thundercat figures from the mid-80s. And I love this magazine. It's so cool. They'd compile like really beautiful photos of all the figures on card backs. And then you'd also get the vehicles. This is something I'm still on the hunt for. Thunder tanks are super ridiculously expensive on the secondary market. Super 7, they're making that crazy ultimate Thunder tank that was crowdfunded thing. And if you've seen photos of the box alone, it's gigantic. It's like the size of a dinner table. Here's Spawn. This is kind of neat. This kind of reminds me of the crowd-funded Spawn figure that McFarlane did maybe like 2 years ago. Spawn was really popular during this time period. They were kind of, in my opinion, responsible for kind of like reinvigorating the action figure collecting hobby and also really forcing other toy companies to like rethink how they made toys and the quality of their toys and like the level of detail and like this the paint application, everything. McFarlane, they really set a new standard with the Spawn action figures. These are all great. I love this. We have Hamburger Head Spawn. That was the second release or re-release of the figure. But this is a different head actually. They were, and much like today, you know, McFarlane, they were doing like the gold colored figures. You know, we see that a lot with their multiverse line with DC. Here's G.I. Joe during the mid-90s. So this was prior to Hasbro bringing back a Real American Hero. For a while, they kind of reshifted to the older collector who were like more in tune with like the 12-inch figures. And some of these, as mentioned in the article, some of these were Target exclusives. So G.I. Joe, you know, these are just kind of like the generic kind of like soldiers. They're not like the comic book superhero inspired ones from like the cartoons. You know, this is like what G.I. Joe was originally. Now, this is one of my favorite articles in the Tomart magazines. They highlighted this one customizer named, I think, Ken Pruitt. And here he is. The article talks about how during, I think, the late 80s, early 90s, how his son was really into Star Wars figures. But there wasn't any new product available. So they'd buy figures like at flea markets and at conventions. And then they'd made these beautiful dioramas like Jabba's Palace. And then he would create, you know, these really detailed scenes and custom figures and vehicles. This is one of my favorite articles in this magazine. I would love to know what this guy's up to nowadays. Because keep in mind, this magazine came out in 1996, 97. And here's his fan-made sand speeder. It was kind of cool because if you look at the pieces and examine them closely, you can kind of tell that he kind of cobbled pieces together from other Star Wars vehicles and like G.I. Joe vehicles. And essentially just kit bashed all these new vehicles, which is awesome. He made a Bantha. He even made a Jabba's sail barge, I think out of cardboard, which is beautiful. Now, the sail barge, it's like one of those things where I kind of wish I crowdfunded the HasLab one, but, you know, for one, it was too expensive, and number two, the size was just too, I would have nowhere to store something that large. I like this, though. This looks, you know, very feasible and reasonable to me. You know, it's not, like, as big as, like, a dining room table, and it looks fantastic. There's a part of me that kind of wants to like try to see if I could, you know, make my own Jabba sail barge, but I don't know. We'll see. Here's his custom Jabba's Palace diorama. And I love this too. This is like his custom vehicles. So him and his son would go to like flea markets, buy like, you know, old broken vehicles and just repurpose them. And it's really cool and fun. And a lot of these look like they could be like legit Star Wars vehicles too, especially some of these TIE fighters. You know, quite the imagination. Really awesome. And then here's some of his custom figures. Before Hasbro or Kenner made the maskless Vader, he did a custom, and then he even did a custom Boba Fett of what he thought Boba Fett looked like underneath the helmet. It's a very like scarred, beat up looking Boba Fett. Looks nothing like Temuera Morrison. Keep in mind this was prior to the prequels. And we have some of his custom action figures. So this is awesome. I love this so much. There's something about these older style of figures. Like, if you didn't grow up during this time period, you know, I think you kind of missed out on something really special. You know, granted, these figures aren't as advanced as today's action figures, but I don't know. They had a certain charm and magic about them. And here's some Batman stuff that was coming out in the 90s. This was Kenner. So these figures here, the Legends of Batman, they were kind of these red carded ones. I've talked about these before. The red carded ones were exclusive to the Warner Brothers stores. So back during this time period, Warner Brothers had their own stores and they'd sell exclusive merchandise. And then these standard carded Legends of Batman, these are the ones that you could find at retail, like at KB or at Toys R Us. There was a Superman toy line at the time. Batman Forever just came out. Great 2-pack. I love this a lot. That's awesome. This is very relevant right now, Beast Wars. Just the other day, the new Transformers Rise of the Beast trailer came out. Looks awesome. Here's some Toy Biz X-Men figures. Now, this is what I was talking about before. Like, I loved it when companies would make, like, dedicated specific toy lines. Like, you know, we have Marvel Legends and whatnot, but I kind of loved it how Toy Biz had multiple lines of action figures, and each line was, like, this focused on, like, a key theme. Like, over here is this, you know, X-Men and Generation X. Over here is Spider-Man, and I think that's the Ben Reilly Spider-Man, I think, the costume. And then there's the larger 12-inch figures, which were always available at your local KB. Here's action figures by Playmates. We got Star Trek Voyager in the never-ending line of Star Trek figures. We have Turtles. So many Turtles. The Tick, the steel box. My buddy JC, he obsessed over this thing. I couldn't remember if this was a rare piece or not. So during this time period, Power Rangers was past Mighty Morphin, and I think Zeo was the second iteration of the Power Rangers. I think, or was it Turbo? I can't remember. Oh, here's some cool stuff. Here's some of the Star Wars variants. There was the open-handed Han, and then the closed-gripped Han. You know, this was a running change. We have the novelizations of Shadows of the Empire, Thrawn Trilogy. Updated price guide on some of the Star Wars figures. Now, some of the older vintage, vintage figures. More ads. This is Figures Incorporated. More advertising. More mail orders. And I think that kind of wraps it up in terms of content. Here's some RoboCop action figures. It's crazy to think that there was a whole line of kids' action figures based around an R-rated movie. It's even more crazy that in the year 2022, you could buy new RoboCop action figures. It's just insane. And then here on the back, we have an ad for McFarlane Toys and their Total Chaos line. These are great looking figures. It always kind of pains me when I'm at like conventions or toy stores or comic book shops and I kind of see these older figures, and I don't know, sometimes it kind of bums me out that, I don't know, that some people don't appreciate these as much as they should. Alright, so let's wrap this one up. Hope you enjoyed this little piece of action figure history. You know, for me, it's always fun to revisit this time period. You know, if you're like in my age group, you know, in your 30s or 40s or 50s even, I hope this brings back, you know, a lot of fond memories of toy collecting and action figures and Star Wars. It was such a fun time. So yeah, this is cool. So yeah, this is something I'd like to do more often in my channel. You know, maybe for the weekly vlog, every now and then we'll highlight, you know, one of these older magazines and cover that time period. I think it's always fun to revisit yesterday. You know, toy collecting is very different nowadays, especially with the advent of like social media, crowd-funded campaigns, and you know, all sorts of wackiness. But this is always fun. You know, looking back at how things were. All right, so let's wrap this up. Once again, my name is Lou. If you're new to my channel, welcome. If you're a returning viewer, subscriber, thank you so much for your continued support. I greatly appreciate it. So until the next video, be safe, take care of yourself, buy lots of toys, and most importantly, be happy. And I'll see you at the next one. All right, later.